Welcome to the Chronicle podcast. Here we are on a new episode. The title is Readers Beyond Their Years. And so you may have in your life encountered a child and thought, why is it that they seem like such an old soul, that they have an incredible vocabulary to describe their lives, they're able to see emotions in others that adults seem incapable of grasping after many decades of experience on this earth. And our topic then is, why is it that reading is able to develop empathy in young children so effectively? Now that's the tip of the iceberg. There are all sorts of benefits to reading, but that is the focus that we're going to take today, and the different points where reading touches on that in terms of early childhood development. So I'm Dave. I'm the CEO and founder of Chronicle Creations, and I'm assisting with my incredible team to create Dreambook, the story creation app for children between the ages 3 to 8. And if you're going to make something like this, you'd like to understand the research behind why reading is so beneficial, thus the research topics that we're going to share here on the podcast. So I'd like to set the stage. In the research that I did leading up to this that we talk about today, I discovered something I'd never heard about, and it is called the Sally Ann test. Now, this is a test that is usually administered for children between the ages of 3 and 4, because it's at this point in our lives, in our early childhood development, that we are able to pass this test. And it is shown that young readers who do so for pleasure, do so for study, mostly for pleasure, let's face it, when you're about 3 or 4 years old, what are you studying? That if they read a lot, that they're able to pass this test much more quickly. But first, of course, we want to understand what that test is. So in the Sally Ann test, imagine, if you will, that there is a child observer, and it's this child that we're testing. We are going to understand with this test what they're capable of imagining in other entities, other beings other than themselves, other human beings, and that they would have the ability to have a sense of people having different information from themselves. So I won't say any more before I talk about literally what happens in the test. So a child will observe a room, and in that room there will be an object. It could be something as simple as a golf ball, or in the one that I read, it was a marble. And so a child at about 3 years old who has not yet developed this capability in themselves, this thing that I will reveal, you ask them at first, this golf ball that they see in the room, you would ask them, where is the golf ball? And they would answer, oh, well, it's right there in front of me. And you would just set it, say, for example, on the floor. Then the next step of the test is to move that golf ball, move that marble, and go and put it into a box. You could then ask a child, this child, where is the marble, where is the golf ball now? And the child will answer, regardless of age, or not regardless, but at this point in time, they would be able to tell you, oh, well, the golf ball, of course, it's been put in a box now, because that's where someone has put it. They're aware of that. The next step of the test, someone else comes into the room. Let's call that person, the person who moved the golf ball or the marble. Let's say that they're Anne. The next person that comes into the room is Sally. We would ask the observing child, where do you think that Sally thinks the golf ball is? And if a child has not yet developed this empathy, this cognitive ability yet, they will answer that Sally thinks that the golf ball is inside the box. And what this illustrates is that there is a point in our lives where we are not able to recognize that the information that we are aware of is different from others that are present, even if they were not present for the moment that we saw something, which is fascinating to consider the implications of. So a child that has not yet developed this cognitive ability, as I say, they will think that Sally is privy to the same information that they have because they saw it, and all information that they have is shared universally in the world. A child that has developed empathy and gone further along, they call this in the theory of mind, will be able to tell you that Sally doesn't know where the golf ball is, because this child is able to grasp that people other than themselves have different information that they are privy to, and then make different choices based on that information. Studies have been shown that if a child reads a lot, or more likely is read to a great deal when they are this old, at around 3 years old, that they have a much, much higher likelihood of being able to differentiate their own viewpoint from others having a viewpoint. And so there's an incredible value right away in reading to your children, because they will more quickly be able to empathize and understand not just information, but emotional states. And they did a test where they discovered that children who are exposed even to much more emotional words, like this person is happy, this person is sad, this person has anxiety, they are equipped then to more early on imagine that someone has a different state of being than themselves. And so you might laugh that this seems like a very simple test to pass, but it is distinct that we do not immediately have this capacity. It's something that needs to be developed within us. And you've probably met one or two adults as you've gone through your experiences in life and thought, is this person aware that other people exist as well? And so that we might encourage reading in our children is another way for them to be able to get out of this limited perspective. Now, that aside, I think we've just paused for one moment here to say it's really, really interesting. It's kind of beautiful in some way, even if it illustrates that you're not at a higher cognitive level, that you would think that whatever you know is shared information to the rest of the world. So I think that's really cool. And I didn't know that we ever existed in that way, or I wasn't aware that there was a line that we could cross where suddenly that becomes something you're capable of. Just thinking that you would be sitting there looking at others behaving, whether they're in the room, out of the room, and whatever your experience is a shared experience. It might also inform the way that we speak to children at that age as well. So much as this is an education on how children develop, the way that we can parent can be affected by this as well. Because now if you understand this fact, it would make things a lot clearer if you saw your child acting in a way that was inconsiderate of others. Because, well, we naturally move past this point somewhere along the line between 3 and 4. It can take much longer. And then if you had to speak to them about something that they'd done, if you don't, and it was poor behavior, and you don't understand this fact, for example, with a child that is 2 years old, well, you could say, why didn't you know that that was an inconsiderate thing to do? The information was obvious. If you knew that they were thinking in this way, like that was their sandwich, we made that for them. I don't know. I run out of exact examples here, but that you would know that they've done that because they're helpless to do so, because they didn't know that another person didn't know what they knew. If that isn't confusing, you're doing very well. So let's talk about what else I'll go over in the course of this podcast, just teasers, if you will. So kids disappear into stories and empathy clicks on. Storytime builds social skills before life tests them. Reading every day links to kinder behavior and steadier focus. Interactive tales turn choices into safe practice rounds for real life. Early reading power later shows up in math and science gains. So there is a relationship between being able to read well, but actually then do better in other subjects, although that was not the case for me. No amount of reading could ever cure my inadequacies when it came to math. But the science shows that if you do read, you have a much, much better chance of understanding these things. Also, you get a lifelong edge. Childhood book lovers earn more and stress less as adults. And we'll go over a few Cole's notes here where the research shows that this is the case. So let's jump in. First one that we have here, a Millennium Cohort study followed almost 9,000 United Kingdom children reading for pleasure every day at age 7, predicts more kindness and less hyperactivity by age 11, even after adjusting for family and school factors. So what they found with this is that children, again, this idea of empathy, it's because you develop this sense of an other than yourself, and you get examples of kindness. So if you're reading very often, you're seeing examples of pro-social behaviors that mean that you would more likely want to emulate them, because these pro-social behaviors that you see in the books are carried out by heroes or characters that the children often like. So if you see Babar and constantly being kind, Babar the elephant, I've dated myself a little bit. I don't know that kids read Babar anymore. Maybe they do. Tell me in the comments. But if you see Babar and he's always kind to people, it's shown that if children are reading these kinds of books in their classrooms, they're being kinder to other students. And it's because they're emulating the behaviors of what they've seen in a book. So if you want to be able to have a child get along better, be more socially capable, then reading is a really good way to accomplish that. Next up, in a 9-week reading and feeling program, interesting program, 2nd and 3rd graders read emotion-rich stories and discussed each scene. Their active emotion vocabulary jumped up 30%, and they grew better at spotting hidden feelings. Boys showed the biggest leap, which narrowed the usual gender gap. So this is the idea that it gets a little bit philosophical, which I find fascinating, is that reading, in effect, broadens reality for you. It's this idea, like you could see this, I'll go on a bit of a tangent here, in a book like 1984, that classic dystopic future with Big Brother and the wall screens and all the stuff that we have now. What they do in that book is that they release different dictionaries. The powers that be, the government that's in control, will release dictionaries. And what one of the main characters has noticed, hope I got this right, is that each year that they release a new version of that dictionary, it has less and less words. And what this has the effect of doing is that if you do not have the vocabulary to describe your reality, it's like you're removing a piece of that reality from that person. If you can say, I'm feeling on edge, well, that allows you to articulate something in yourself and gives it clarity. If you can say that you feel fantastic, if you can say that you feel not sad but unsure, if you can use these words to articulate yourself, then you can better understand your own emotions, and not, of course, just your own. You would be able to understand the emotions of others. And is that incredibly useful? Of course. Now, it's helpful for us to get along better. That's essential. It's really good. We want to do that generally. Reading makes better human beings. But then if you thought about it purely from, let's go into a material success perspective, that you want to have better outcomes in your jobs, your job interviews, being able to better read the emotions of your interviewers, or if you're in a position of authority, better able to read the people that you're interviewing is going to give you a more positive result, because you can pick up on these subtle details and you have the vocabulary to recognize what they are. The vocabulary is actually making you more observant. Really interesting stuff, I think. So here's another one. This will be more millennial, I think. I don't know how popular it is now. I could read about 2 of these books, but I ran out of steam past a certain point. I'm a big fan. This is one place that I'm a bit of a snob with this series, but I should still get through it. You know, a book's a book. So Prejudice drops as a result of reading books. Guided reading of Harry Potter passages about discrimination led elementary students to warmer attitudes towards immigrants and other groups. The change was strongest when readers identified with Harry, suggesting that walking in a hero's shoes lowers bias. So another thing that reading can do for us is that we try on different perspectives. If it's kind of straightforward, it's that if in your life you've only ever seen one type of people, you have no capacity to imagine another. You've gotten farther than the theory of mind in that you at least recognize in the people that are around you that they have different thoughts than you. And so within that group, sure, you can now have empathy for the people that you're closely associated with. But when you read stories, turns out it doesn't matter if it's goblins or dragons or, I don't know, all the multitude of fantastical creatures in Harry Potter, that being exposed to beings other than what you are used to and a story showing compassion towards those individuals means that we are better able to cope with other social groups that we encounter that we are not usually in touch with. You can imagine the benefits for this for traveling. You can imagine the benefits of this for a culture that is incredibly multicultural, where you're going to be next door neighbors with people that don't look like you, have a different skin tone. This can be really helpful. Like, I might mention when I begin these podcasts that I live in Japan, and it's incredibly helpful for you to be able to go abroad equipped with these greater perspectives and less prejudice when it comes to interacting with people, because I think, Shane Gillis had a great way of describing this where he said, I think people have misunderstood racism. It's not that people are or they are not. It's more like hunger. Sure, you're not hungry now, but if you go out into the streets and you get cut off by a hot dog in traffic, you might be really hungry for that hot dog. So when you come to Japan and you're struggling through all these different cultural situations, or wherever you might have lived abroad, it doesn't have to be Japan, but that's my wheelhouse, that our default, if we don't have the empathetic capacity to just see someone as another human being, can be to fall into this very narrow category of broad brushing the entire ethnic group because we don't understand them well enough. So if you read Harry Potter, if you read Lord of the Rings, if you read the Earthsea series by Ursula K. Le Guin, I highly recommend it, and it will reduce our prejudice. So turns out, learning about goblins, more than just fun to imagine them getting killed by the hero. Next up, a vocabulary vault. So fiction for children packs roughly twice as many rare words per 1,000 as everyday conversation. Regular exposure seeds sophisticated vocabulary and complex, apparently I can't read, sentence patterns, giving young book lovers fluent speech and writing that sounds beyond their years. So this is maybe the most straightforward of the kind of things that you would encounter and think that a child was older than they were. Well, if they have a larger vocabulary than you do, that's one of the easiest ways to feel like you've encountered someone who is an old soul. And it makes sense. I think this might be one of the more well-known characteristics of reading, is that you gain a greater vocabulary. You can then, therefore, articulate yourself a whole lot better and will appear older than your years. Interesting here. An executive boost. So tracking a twisting plot exercises working memory, attention shifting, and updating predictions. A national scholastic survey that paired reading logs with cognitive tests found frequent fiction readers ahead of peers on flexible thinking and abstract reasoning. So I think this is really cool in terms of, you might say that this one is associated with imagination, that this allows you to, if the door is not there, that you make your own. You can see solutions to problems that may not be evident to others, or they may have needed a more clear-cut solution to be able to solve the issue. So I read this really interesting study that was talking about imagination. And there was a control group that did not read any stories, and then there was this group of children that had read a bunch of really fantastical, crazy, wild fiction. And after this period of time where there were the group of children that had read the fiction, and then there was the group of children, the controlled group, that had not, they created a game where they needed to traverse this room, and they were given a number of tools to do so. So when I say tools, it's like imaginary objects. They had like a cardboard was given, and this was said to be like planking, and the floor was hot lava. And they were given a few other things that might be able to assist them in getting from one side of the room to the other side of the room. And the children that had read more came up with far more creative solutions to this problem and were able to get across the room far more frequently than the children who had not read. So I know a lot of, this is a really important point that I keep finding in the research, and I think should be drilled home, is that yes, reading is fun, but the effect of reading is totally practical in our day-to-day lives, whether, as I say, it would be to go traveling, whether it would be getting a job, getting the right people into your company, for anything. There are so many use cases where if you've read more, then your outcome in the real world for whatever it is that you're trying to do has a much higher likelihood of success. So this one I think is really cool because it's very near and dear to my heart, and it was actually a little bit where I was initially thinking about developing Dreambook before we did the research and realized that this bit of research, it's more for older children, like I would say the ages 9 to 12, where they're just able to read more, and so they can get involved with this. So it's the idea of choice and consequence. So interactive fiction lets children steer the plot. Choosing paths forces them to forecast outcomes and weigh moral trade-offs before seeing consequences. Classroom observations record higher engagement plus measurable gains in decision accuracy and empathic reasoning after repeated sessions. So when we talk about interactive fiction, what are we talking about? Well, I mean, I love video games, so like a really easy one for that is just play a video game, and you're going to, in any RPG, you'll be making these choices all the time, and they'll have moral repercussions. The Witcher 3 is a grand masterpiece of this. It's a very gray world. You realize that it's very hard to make the right decision, and the decisions that you make do not always result in the outcomes that you would hope for. But anyways, that's just a little bit about me, the games I like to play. But what I'm talking about here as it relates to reading, where this pops up and you see it, is in Choose Your Own Adventure. So when I was a kid, I came across these books, Choose Your Own Adventure books, and it would be that you would read for several pages through the book, and it was all kinds of topics. It would be like space adventures, kind of Indiana Jones scenarios, fantastical, sci-fi, mystery. They're wonderful. There's so many different types, and I bet you watching may have read one of these at some point in your life. They were great. These are shown to have this added benefit because whereas reading isn't passive, innately you have to read, decode, understand things, and then be able to digest that mentally. But this is a more active reading because where we are doing a mental simulation to read anything, our brains have this like really fascinating detail where what we visualize, a large part of our experience, our brain is not able to determine if it's the material real world or if it's in our head. And so when you're reading, you're doing a mental simulation. And so it is like you actually lived it, and that has a base level return on investment, let's say, for the reading that you're doing, because you could, in effect, have lived truly 1,000 lives if you've read 1,000 books with 1,000 characters, because your brain doesn't really know the difference between the two of them, especially as you are younger and we're still developing that capacity for what is truly real, what is fictional. We're getting that sense. When children read these interactive stories, the choose your own adventure, because their decisions directly impact the course of the plot, it even further immerses the child or the adult, they're still great for adults, into the feeling of that they are that character, and then that whatever choices are made, it deepens the immersion in the simulation that you're experiencing. So it's no wonder that if kids are reading these choose your own adventures, that they are getting a true sense of moral repercussions, because it was their choice that led to that moral repercussion. So I think that's fascinating. We will, with our phase 2 of Dreambook, be working on a choose your own adventure like experience, because we at that point will be able to include older age groups in the use of the app, because we've nailed that 3 to 8 demographic, and we'll keep improving it, but of course we would like it to expand to include more readers. So here's a great one. Early as story as therapy. I really like this idea. It's bibliotherapy. So early as 1916, librarians prescribed stories to help children process grief or fear, an approach later called bibliotherapy. Modern trials showed that guided fiction reading can lower anxiety scores and build resilience after family upheaval. So this makes I want to do a little bit more here. Like, this is as early as 1916, but there's like some interest. There's like hieroglyphics in the tomb of Ramses. I can't remember which Ramses. There was a couple of them in Egypt, but it's something to the effect that the library is the hospital of the soul. It's that you go here to heal your soul. And I would not argue with that. And it shows that we were onto this idea a little while ago, before we had so much scientific evidence to confirm it. But it makes sense, and it dovetails nicely with the idea that not only do we see emotions, and that builds our sense of reality in the first place, or words to describe reality that we never had before, but if you can see examples of resilience, you can call upon those examples of resilience in your own life. Again, that your brain isn't so good at determining whether this is actual reality or not, then in this case is really beneficial to us, because if we see 1,000 examples of a hero that never gives up, how much more likely is that child or human being, when faced with a great challenge, able to overcome it? Well, they've seen it 1,000 times. They know what this is like. They've heard great writing. They've imagined philosophically how you can get past grief, how you can deal with anxiety, how you are more than your failures, and how you might not be so worried all the time. So I think there's other research as well that goes into just reading does great things in terms of lowering your cortisol levels, but it's here that we could focus on the fact that it allows you to actually imagine difficult situations, simulate them, integrate that into yourself, and then overcome them when they arrive to your life. This is a more advanced form of what we've seen before with all sorts of childhood writing, where children have firsts. Again, in Dreambook, we've tried to address this specifically to have a particular subgenre of stories that we call life events, where many parents will read to their children to anticipate something that is going to happen in that child's life. So maybe there's something really scary for a kid, like their first day of school. So what can you do? You can read a book about the first day of school. That allows you to now have an example of Sally or Anne that went to school. It was a little bit scary, but the end of this story is that they met a great friend. And so while this might be a challenge for them, and it is scary and it is intimidating, the outcome is worth enduring the discomfort for. And so we do that already for these very basic things. It could be a first day of school. Maybe it's a visit to the dentist. Maybe it's making your first friend. Maybe it's moving to a new place. Maybe it's living in another country. Maybe, it goes on and on and on. But then you have these examples where it can be these emotional states that it gives us examples of as well, and early exposure to them so that we can integrate them into our lives. Pretty cool. So next up we have here a life dividend. I think that this is pretty cool. So a 40-year British follow-up study found that adults who loved reading as children earned about 13% more and carried lower inflammatory stress markers like C-reactive protein, indicating a long-term payoff of early fiction. So it's like, wow, you just make more money if you read? That's pretty cool. And you live longer and more healthily. But this would make sense for the things that I just mentioned. If you're able to encounter difficult scenarios, like stress melts us. We know this. Like cortisol is useful for attention. We actually get a big dump of it in the morning when we wake up so that we're attentive and we're alert, and that gets us going in our day. But if you are stewing in cortisol all the time, the technical term is not to melt your body, but it's really, really unhealthy for you. So you could imagine that if you're reading frequently and you're able to assimilate life experiences more quickly and get past them without being weighed down by them, then yeah, you're not going to have so much inflammatory stress markers like C-reactive protein because you're just calmer going through life. So I think that there's some real benefit there to us if we want to be less stressed. And if you want your kids to be less stressed, I mean, as we get older, we naturally have more experience, and so we get this through life. That's the whole thing, right? Like one is a simulated experience, one's the cold, hard facts. You can simulate these experiences where you'll then get used to them in a way that's far less threatening and maybe even exciting for a child to experience loss where really there was actually no loss, but you experienced it. You're probably going to be better dealing with that later on. So now, another one that I had here, and I was like, oh, this totally makes sense. I hadn't thought of that before. Again, nothing could save me. Nothing could help the fact that I was absolutely horrible at math. I had some of the most brilliant minds around me to assist, great friends. They were very good at math. I could never overcome it. But they do find that when children read more, they do much better at math. And this makes a lot of sense to me because, well, to me, once I've read the research on it, was that if you are better at reading and you're better at decoding language, you are better at encountering mathematical questions and decoding the meaning more easily. So it's kind of this classic idea of like a train leaves Osaka at 1:24 p.m. going 100 kilometers an hour. One leaves from Tokyo at the bullet train and it's leaving at this time. At what point do they pass each other? If you're not able to read well, then that is immediately, like you can't even get to the math of the problem because you're just stuck looking at these words like, what is going on? I don't understand this vocabulary. Like, what's a bullet train? Blah, blah, blah. And so if you read more, that doesn't slow you down. You have competency in the reading, so you can focus on the truly important thing, which is the actual mathematics skill of then solving that equation that you're being faced with. So I think that that's another reason. If you could get any chance other than just to have that God-given ability that you're better at math than the rest of us, if you needed a leg up, that would be super helpful, and I would absolutely love to have, I don't know, I wish that had an effect on me. You'd think that I would have had more success for the amount that I read, but I remember one time when I was at high school, they even separated my high school into math sets, which I actually wonder, I'm like, does that become a self-fulfilling prophecy because you put a child, they've got, say, 6 sets of math, and then you put them, you think, helping them into the 6th set, that's the bottom one, and you put them into there, and they're going to get, the math tuned to their level, but they never now encounter anybody who's really gifted. So it's kind of like seeing your hero. If you don't see any heroes, how could you imagine yourself as one, or how much harder is it to imagine yourself as a math hero if you never encounter them? But it didn't matter. Nothing that could be done. No amount of reading, no set that I was put into. I did whatever term test, and I'd asked the teacher, I was like, I studied so much. I worked so hard on this one. I think I did really well. And he's like, you did pretty good. I was like, oh, I'm so excited. And he was like, what do you think you got? And I feel like he was trolling me a little bit after this. And I was like, 75. He was like, oh, not that good. I was like, oh, okay, well, like, I guess then if it's, you said I did pretty good, like a C plus, like maybe like a 68 or something. And he was like, oh, no, it was like 58. I was like, what is the standard that you have me at? Did you expect that I was going to get like 30% or something? I don't know. I don't know what was going on there. I don't like it at all. That wasn't very cool. But I guess I'll finish up here because the research is coming to a close, and that then means that we will as well, with the idea that this, as I mentioned with the Egyptian pharaohs, that we knew this. We knew this in ancient times. I wouldn't say it's ancient, so obviously you have like the Egyptian pharaohs. We had it in 1916. We had all these examples. But it's really coming into focus now with the backed research on the topic that reading is so much more than enjoyment. Reading is the reason that a child, when I say they might seem wise beyond their years, they are. They've lived 1,000 more lifetimes than someone who has not, because they've simulated all of it in their head. And our brain doesn't know the difference. And so whether it's their vocabulary, their ability in math, their career, their empathy to work with others, it will touch every piece of our lives if we read more. And it can be for enjoyment, but it'll still affect all these very pragmatic things, which if you're looking at jobs, if you're looking at career, if you're looking at family, if you're looking at these difficult moments in our life that we all must pass by, whether that's loss, whether that's not getting a job that you really hoped for, maybe it's a bad mark on a test. Reading can transform our capability in all of them. So I think we should read. And this was a lot of fun to talk about. I really appreciate people tuning into the podcast. I hope you will tune into more. And they'll take on this kind of tone. I thought this was cool, just as a topic. Why do kids who read so much seem like they're 40 years old or something like that? And it turns out there's a lot of really good reasons for why that is the case. And then there's all sorts of different focuses that we can have, whether it would be on the imagination that it affords them, whether it would be on, let's just focus on the research for how much children that read are getting better jobs and having better outcomes in their careers. It's a verdant field, so we can go there. There's some really big, exciting news in terms of the company that I would like to share, but soon. This is a little bit of a teaser now. I don't want to go into it too much. But we've had some great developments. I had a cool concept. We were working on one of our most recent modules. I pitched it to the people in our creative team, in our art department, and the results are so cool. So I'm excited for everything right now, and I'm excited for this new format because it serves me so well to not just enjoy reading, but then to understand how it's going to affect the kids that would create stories in our app that much more. You wouldn't think that you had to be a defender of reading or an evangelist of reading, but we know that it's falling off, and we know that it naturally does when children turn 9 years old, and we know that that's only increasingly becoming the case. And so I think that we should seek to turn back the tide with more reading in our families, individually, for pleasure, for research, and we will continue this great passion that we have at Chronicle Creations and share with you as much information as we can on the topic. So I'll close out there. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope to catch you in the next podcast. Hug the ones you love, and that's all for now.